well. Because anytime we bring something new into the masses, right, that new thing, it stands out, and people are going to want to test it, right? They're going to find out if it's either good or bad. More often than not, it's perceived as bad. It's perceived as something new, a threat to the system that already exists. And when we're attached to things being a certain way, whether it be ideas or material things, or attached to the way people perceive us, right? Like, we lose it. We disconnect from the bigger purpose, from something greater, right? Like, we get caught up in the Matrix and the games, and we get, what's the movie that I'm thinking of where I want to like say it's like the War Games or whatever. I can't even, like, the main character, and her name's Kat. It's like, it's 4 o'clock in the morning for me, so bear with me. The Hunger Games, right? Where we're pulled, when we get into jealousy, when we get into this competitive mode, right? Then we're pulled from the real world, and then when we're put into this alternative reality, like a video game, where we're pitted against each other and divided. And oftentimes it's through no fault of our own. It comes through social conditioning, right? Like, we are who we are because of who everyone is, because of our history as humanity, right? That has all led up to these points. Like, people don't just poof and pop out of nowhere as these like raw, clean slates, right? People are born into families carrying genetic history, carrying genetic traumas. So when we're talking about doing work to heal the self, right, once you get through your primary psychology or your primary psyche and you start breaking down those elements, then you start working through your own family patterns and healing family traumas and things like that, and going way, way back. And then on an energetic level, we can do those things, right? Like, if we can conceptualize our existence beyond the material, physical meat suit, right? Like, if we can look beyond the physical form into the energetics and the reasons behind a person or behind things, right? Then we can begin to empathize and understand, again, the chain of events and the patterns that have led up to this person being who they are in the place that they are. And I think we all do have our own purpose. We all show up for certain and specific reasons. And if we begin to listen to that, and we step into our own power, right, then if other people can't do that, or if they don't know the tools, or if they're taught or conditioned to think otherwise, then of course there's this like envy or jealousy, or there's this perception that somebody has something that somebody doesn't have, and it just cycles into no solutions, right? Like, it just generates and creates more problems or perpetuates problems. Like, the analogy comes to mind where I guess take a deep breath, ground, center myself, focus, so I don't pull myself off topic, not being present, right? So the analogy of the dog carrying a steak, or there's this story, right? There's this dog, he's walking along in the woods, and he's got this giant piece of meat in his mouth, and he's so proud, and he comes across this lake, and he looks into the water, but he doesn't know it's a lake, right? He just sees a reflection of this other dog, and he sees this other dog carrying this really big steak. He's like, oh, I want that big steak, and then ends up dropping his steak into the water, right? And then trying to get the reflection, and then in it loses everything, right? I've always thought that brings a really interesting picture to mind when it comes to competition and when it comes to jealousy, because we forget what we have, especially as women, right? We forget about our own assets. We forget about the value in our own self. And I don't know, we try to look outside of ourselves to try to have something that somebody else has, right? Like, as a woman, I'm I'm pretty petite. Like, I'm pretty scrawny. I'm a skinny girl. Like, I like to eat. I really, really wish I could have a big booty, right? But it's just not in my makeup, so I have to accept that, you know. But I see a lot of women who are thick, who are like on the bigger side, fat women. And they're just like, oh, I want to be skinnier, I want all these things. And it's just like, well, from my perspective, no, you don't, right? Like, we always think the grass is greener on the other side, and it's a personal preference. Some people like this kind of a person, and some people like that kind of a person, and then you have to stand in your light, stand in your power, own your own self and confidence, and like attracts like. So when it comes to the idea of like marriage or lovers or other people or, your other half or your whatever you want to call it, relationships in that regard, like, yeah, if you don't love yourself, if you don't know yourself, if you're not standing in your own power and you're attracting people to you, then you're creating dependency, or you're creating this expectation that somebody else is going to do something for you, or has to fill in this other hole, or like you create the expectations that other people are supposed to fulfill a role because you can't fulfill it yourself. So if you're self-fulfilled, then you don't need somebody else. You don't need that other person or the opposite sex to do the things necessarily that you can't do if you can honor both sides of it within yourself. I don't know. It's a personal preference, cultural preference, maybe. Beats me. Beats me. Mm. But try being a woman in your early 30s and never being married. See how people treat you for what they think of you, right? They think there's like this incompetence, or there's like something wrong with you because you don't have somebody else there, right? Or like the expectations between men and women are very different, where it's more acceptable that a man would never be, but not a woman, or like, right? Like, we have all these like very subconscious underlying beliefs that help to shape us. And I think we forget that, especially when it comes to jealousy or when it comes to competition. Like, a lot of it is so subconscious, unconscious, really. Because what is it like? And I mentioned this before, I probably mentioned this 1,000 times in the context of my professional life, right? Where like at least 95% of our behavior is unconscious. It's programmed. So there's like this little 5% window of consciousness where we're actually aware of what it is that we're doing, right? The rest of it's all pre-programmed. It's biological, it's behavioral, it's biochemical, hormonal, whatever you want to call it. So when it comes to cultivating consciousness, like, if we can just shift our awareness ever so slightly to that, perhaps we can help to dissolve some of that, like some of that jealous energy, or some of that energy where we feel incomplete in ourselves and have to look outside of ourselves to fill in the holes and fill in the gaps. So, yeah, I'm just gonna kind of like go back to the chat room here a little, kind of scan through. Let's see. But yeah, expectations. Let's see. I'm kind of here with you, sorry. Sorry, I guess this is for future broadcasts. Um, reading through these conversations, right? Like, I have like the same thing where a lot of men who show interest in me turn out to be cold, manipulative, arseholes, for sure. I'm not quite sure what all that's about, but I think there's just a lot of pain body and a lot of pain body out there. Or I hear from a lot of men too, where it's like, well, women are blah 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 blah. Like anytime I'm like, well, man, whatever. It always like they always do this thing where they flip it back around, right? Well, women, blah 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 blah. Or they try to like victimize themselves in the context of it, or we start getting into the ideas of like male privilege, toxic masculinity, male fragility, those kind of things, and man, there are just some people out there that are very emotionally reactive to those terms, or they take it again like as an attack to personal character, or like people have like these really strong attachments into their ideas, like we're really attached to ourselves and our world. And but I think there's a survival element to that, right? Like if we're consciously, if we're constantly changing our minds, it's difficult to get a lot done, right? And you kind of turn out like me, or like your energy is kind of scattered all over the place. Or maybe I can blame it on astrology or something like that. I'm a Taurus. I'm a Taurus on the cusp of Gemini, like right there on the cusp. And so, as a personality profiling way of understanding the self, right? Tauruses have a difficult time making up their mind, right? Like they like to weigh out all the options and like really, really think things through, because once we make up our minds, I mean that's it. My mind's made up. There's been a lot of thought put into it. There's been a lot of like effort into being very conscious or conscientious of how different scenarios and things could play out. So like if the plane's crashing, if you're a parent and you've got a small child, as the flight attendant will tell you, if the plane's crashing, you put the air mask on you first. We don't have a small child, right? And you're like one of those very hopeful people who likes to put themselves aside to assist other people. Like, if you don't have an air mask on you, you're very limited in the amount of people that you can reach and that you can save, that you can connect with. So, I don't know. It's challenging. It's really, really challenging. But no, being on the receiving end of jealousy is no fun. It makes people manipulative, right? Devious, or when people are coming from a mindset of lack or wanting or entitlement to something that somebody else has, or feeling like they should have something that's not like, it just makes people do things that aren't very nice, right? And I'm a firm believer that you should treat people the way that you want to be treated, with unconditional love and with the utmost respect at all times. That's one of the hardest things to do in the face of somebody who's coming at you or attacking you or being jealous of you or trying to compete with you in some sort of way. Like, because there are people out there who will really do anything and everything that they can to try to get a rise out of you, or to try to get you to drop the ball, And there are people that have gone to incredibly extreme measures to try and destroy the lives of others, all because they have something that somebody else doesn't want. Look at all the wars that we've had throughout the history of time. I don't know why the Romans are popping into my mind, but I just see like all these Romans and their chariots going to all these other lands and going to all these other communities and to take over everything, right? To take it all. Or even if we look at America, America trying to take over, or like what are I don't even think it's that. Because we're learning in these day and ages that, or at least becoming more globally aware of the underlying 1% or the underlying bodies that direct or manipulate and control the political entities of the countries around the world. So, I mean, right off the bat, things are not what they seem to be, right? Like there's this facade and this wall that we're interacting with other people with, and if we're interacting facade to facade, we're perpetuating these games and we're playing into the system of, corporate materialism, always feeling like you need to have the next best thing, or like just not being content and happy enough with what you have. And as somebody who has sacrificed the comforts of the rich older husband who can take care of all the things for me just so I can focus solely on my art and my education, like, I don't know. That's what I have to say to that. I'm going to take a drink of water. Kind of cool this down and recenter and ground myself here too. Thank you, Revolution Radio. Thank you, listeners. Thank you, all the supporters and the people out there for holding space and for being open to listening to these conversations and engaging with me with this, because I think a lot of this is important. And I don't know, my heart goes out to people who have it all and want more. Because there's just certain people out there where nothing is ever enough. There always needs to be more, 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 more. For control, for domination, I gotta have it all. I've gotta be the best. I've gotta be the one on top. People have to perceive me a certain way in order for me to feel good about myself. And if your self-worth is based on what other people perceive of you, well, then that gets difficult, because then are you coming from God, source, and higher consciousness? Or, are you like Jesus, or are you like Judas? Are you willing to betray and undermine somebody else's life in order just to have something maybe that you didn't have, or just so the other person can't have it? Like, what sort of pain and torture did that person go through to have to inflict that sort of energy onto somebody else? And I wonder that when it comes to perpetrators of sexual assault, or like rapists and things like that, or like child rapists, I even hate saying it out loud. Like, what did these people endure in their lives that has warped their perception so much that they feel they need to gain and take the power away from other people on such a primal level, right? And it would it would be really easy just to forget about jealousy or to not react and respond to it if it weren't a threat to your own life, right? Because I think when that's where like the boundaries have to come in and the defense mechanisms come into play, and we have to be really strong and secure in ourselves, especially when it comes to defending ourselves and defending ourselves to other people, right? Because this is where things get really really complicated and where the dynamics get really blown out of proportion, right? Because if somebody is jealous of another person and they take action on that other person, it can have detrimental effects to their lives. And it's one thing just to like brush it off or to pretend like it's not there to whatever, but I think there's something important to calling it out when you see it, right? Because it is. It's their own problem. And to not internalize somebody else's problems as your own problems, it's challenging. That's where confidence comes into play. It's where you have to be very certain and very secure in yourself, in your self-worth, in your love for life, in living, right? And wanting to have a good life, to want to move forward. Entitlement comes to mind, or like deserve. The word deserve comes to mind. Like, I deserve to have the best. Okay, well, that's kind of open, right? Is there like entitlement there? Like, what do you mean you deserve? Yet we all have a right to life. We have a right to happiness, health, holiness. Happy, healthy, holy. Right? We have a right to be loved and to love. And when somebody defiles that love or tries to take that love away in some sort of way, or they act in a way, in a malicious way, and call that love, right? It gets really tricky, it gets really challenging. I had opened an article, I think last night, just shortly before bed. I didn't get all the way through it, and I wish I would have. Maybe I can find it again. But it goes into like the 7 different types of love. All these like different ideas of what love is and how we love things. And yes, we need to promote global love. Love, 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 right? All we need is love. But we also need strong boundaries. We need respect, right? Like, Americans have done this really stupid thing with the word love, and they've diluted it to where, like, we love everything, we love everybody, but, kill the rapists. Well, how are you gonna preach love while talking about inflicting harm onto somebody else because that person has inflicted harm on them? And as a survivor of sexual assault, as a survivor of rape, one of them, I don't know that it was challenging for me. It became very natural for me to have compassion for the person who inflicted the harm on me, right? To not want to take away another person's life, but to want to find the means to seek justice and heal, right? Because you can, like, punishment, as a behavioral psychologist, like, punishment doesn't really work to an extent. Like, if punishment is full force first time, sure. But if it's not, then you create more deviousness, you create more devious behavior. So we get, especially now, very, very subtle levels of abuse through jealousy, very, very subtle levels of jealousy, very subtle levels of competition that have profound impacts on one another. And especially women, like women undermining other women because they think another guy, like because they think a guy is attractive or something like that, just to find out that that guy has no respect for women in general. Right? But just for sex. Seems like it's all motivated by sex. Sex, 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 sex. Right? And it takes the spirituality out of it. It becomes about fulfilling a physical need. It's addictive personality stuff. It's, looking for escapism. It's looking to feel good in the moment. It's just pleasure seeking. And it completely misses the point of the divine connection. It misses the co-creative potential to make something collectively, consciously, that has a profound impact on the world, right? Instead of things just happening by accident or serendipitously, because we understand now what behavioral patterns are. We know chains of behavior. We have enough resources at our fingertips and a great enough understanding of global history where we should be able to create solutions and new solutions to create a new future for ourselves, right, as a whole, without having to repeat a lot of these same toxic cycles that we've been repeating for centuries, right? If we can put the ego aside, if we can put these old ideologies aside and go, wait a minute, how do we educate and heal for the greatest good of all? How do we heal people, hurt people, right? And if somebody is hurting you, it's probably because they're hurt. And one of our initial reactions is want to hurt back, and then we're just fighting. That gets us nowhere. So if somebody is hurting you and you can consciously respond in a healing way with healthy boundaries, right? Like that doesn't mean to tolerate it. It doesn't mean that it's okay or acceptable, right, for somebody to compete with you or to be jealous of you or whatever, because like these are natural. They're natural feelings. They're a part of the natural human condition, like narcissism, right? Like at some point or another, we all have the capability of displaying narcissistic tendencies. We all have the possibilities to be sad, to be angry, to be elated, whatever the emotional spectrum can be, right? Oh, hang on. We gotta take a mommy break here. Bear with me. Back to real life for a second. Hold on. Come with me. Okay, we're going to go here. See, again, mommy duties first. Good. Okay. Cool. The pillow, it's down here. Welcome to my Real World Revolution radio. Okay. There we go. Okay, we'll shift into here. There you go. I got just a little bit left, buddy. My co-host is awake. Kind of. He's a good little co-host. There we go. Whoop. Okay. But there we go. So, if we don't want to be jealous people, if we don't want to be competitive people, how then do we make conscientious decisions to be better people, right? How do we take accountability for our actions, to be humble, to recognize our mistakes, to acknowledge where growth is happening and can happen, right? How do we get to a point within ourselves where we can look at the people outside of us and be inspired, right? Be inspired to want to do better. Be inspired to want to innovate, right? We have this programming within us, or maybe even jealous people, right? Where they think that they can't or won't, or there's a self-limiting belief in there somewhere. And if they can't, then they'll project that onto somebody else, so somebody else can't either. Or again, it just gets into this world of misunderstanding. I don't get it. I really don't. I think we should live and let live, Allow people to be themselves, allow people to work through their stuff, and to hold space for people to get through those things, right? Jealousy's complex. It affects us all, right? Let's see. I pulled up an article from Psychology Today about jealousy. I posted it on my Facebook page too, and generated a little conversation out of this. And let's see. Okay, so according to psychologytoday.com, right, jealousy is a complex emotion that encompasses feelings ranging from suspicion to rage to fear to humiliation, right? Gets people of all ages, genders, sexual orientations, but most typically aroused when a person perceives a threat to a valued relationship from a third party, right? So the threat may be real or imagined, but it's perceived. It's a perceived threat. Often it comes up in the context of romantic relationships, and there's probably survival logic behind that, right? Especially when it comes to preserving a family or to preserving certain dynamics. There's certain expectations of whose energy belongs to whom, sort of a thing. Or it gets into this realm of possessiveness, right? Where ownership. I think this is why I have a really big problem with marriage, is because the history of marriage, depending on the culture, right, is somewhat founded on this ownership basis, right? People, for the longest time, in many cultures, didn't get married out of love, right? They got married out of economic value, to own or possess a woman, or to have access or resources to her father's land, wealth, cattle, or livestock, whatever it might be, So, ugh. I think as we move forward right into more modern or contemporary relationships, we've kind of disconnected maybe from the conscious awareness that there's that possessive ownership dynamic that perpetuates and feeds into the idea of jealousy. So then we start to think, how do we innovate within the context of relationships? And then we can look to polyamorous relationships or open relationships. Somebody through the Facebook comments or whatever had mentioned something about swingers, right? Of where when it comes to something like sexuality, there's an openness in sharing that with others. Now, from a shamanic perspective, from an energetic perspective, that's where things start to get energetically complex, right? Because then, like, in these intimate settings, when you're connecting with people in a sexual way, in that sort of way, then you're taking on their energy. Whereas a woman, there's that chimeric effect where you're taking on the DNA, or you're taking on these traits and attributes of the other partner. You know, and if you're a woman and you're taking on all of these different partners and all of their partners and their partners' partners and their partners, right? Like, energetically, you're absorbing all of that into your being. And if you're not conscious of that, then all that other energy, all those other beings, all that other stuff is driving your motives, right? It's driving your behavior. And it just gets messy, right? Not to mention, like, the rates of being exposed, or like increasing your rates of being exposed to sexually transmitted diseases, or even not sexually transmitted diseases, you know, just diseases in general, or germs, and so on and so forth. Taking on another person's grief, like, that's a lot to carry. And so when we're talking about jealousy and wanting to take the energy from somebody else, right? I don't know. It's challenging, because if we look here through, like, psychology today, right? It says that jealousy is seen as a necessary emotion because it perverts because it preserves social bonds and motivates people to engage in behaviors that maintain important relationships. Motivates people to engage in behaviors that maintain important relationships. Well, yeah, it motivates people to be manipulative, you know? It motivates people to use intimidation and fear in order to control another person. So if that means maintaining an important relationship, well, what is the importance of that relationship, and why is there such an attachment to maintaining it? Why is there not an openness to allowing that relationship to grow and organically develop into something new? You know? And I don't know, like, I think it's funny here too, or just like what people are jealous of and why, and what, like, how the sexes perceive jealousy. You know, psychology today will tell you that men are more jealous in the context of, like, infidelity, right? Or like physical, sexual infidelity. There's more jealousy in that regard, right? Like, oh, is his bigger than mine? Is he better than me? And, you know, does he look like, what is he? You know, what is his looks versus mine, sort of a thing. Whereas with women, you know, this again according to psychology today, women tend to feel more jealous about emotional infidelity, right? Like, you don't necessarily even have to sleep with somebody else or to, like, have that sort of interaction, right? But, like, if your energy and your focus is going into emotionally supporting somebody else, right, and it's neglecting the emotional needs of somebody else, well, yeah, then of course somebody could be jealous, right? Or that feeling would create a chain of action, right? And this is where, again, consciousness comes into play. So if you're experiencing jealousy within yourself, what is your go-to? If you're jealous that somebody is talking to somebody else, or if there's this whatever, then are you going to go into this rage and physical aggression and to want to fight? Or are you going to walk away? Are you going to make other choices of either confrontation or of just acknowledging to the other person that, hey, this isn't all right, and it's not within my energetic boundaries, it's not something that I value or want in my life, and then so, therefore, done. So it's tricky. I don't know. But research shows that jealousy comes from things like low self-esteem, high neuroticism, again with possession. Fear of abandonment, they say, is also a key motivator, right? So if you're not secure enough within yourself and you're really dependent on other people to feed into your ego or your sense of self, right? Like if you don't know who you are without the people around you in your life, of course you'd be more likely to be jealous, right? To maintain a certain sense of social status or whatever that is. So, I don't know, it's tricky. But I don't know, animals feel it too. Some animals feel it too, the wanting of or the wanting of something else. So it's tricky. Okay, we've got about 10 more minutes here together this morning. And time is just flying by. Flying by. Let me try to focus on like some of the more important facts here. My little one, he's like, let's go back to bed. I want to go back to bed too. That's what I'm gonna do as soon as I get off of this. I'm gonna shut this down, take a big drink of water, and curl back up and see if I can get another like 2-3 hours worth of sleep. Sleep is so important. If we're not sleeping, if we're not well rested, if we're not eating right and drinking water, right? Like if we're not taking care of our base level needs, then we leave ourselves emotionally susceptible to feelings like jealousy, right? Like if we're not meeting our own basic needs, then we're going to be looking for those needs from somewhere else. And if we can't meet those needs within ourselves, right, then we're going to be looking to other people to fulfill those needs for us. And if there's anything that I learned from being a single child of a single mom, of an only child of a single mom, right, or being a single mom with an only child, is that, man, like, I'm grateful for the way that I was raised. And I think my parents, or like my dad especially, I think it has a lot of emotion or guilt in terms of not physically being present, or maybe my mom has guilt in terms of like not being emotionally present. But what I'm so grateful for that is that it has taught me to rely on myself and to depend on myself and to feed and nurture my own soul, right? To give myself validation, to not look outside of myself for fulfillment. Most of my life I've spent a loner, and that's not just because, I grew up with a single mom as an only child. I mean, there's a lot of people like that who are nothing like me, have completely different experiences. This is solely my own personal experience. And so I spent a lot of time by myself in my own space, reflecting on self in life, creating in art, understanding and trying to process and learn about the human experience through the creative process. And this very, how do I want to put it, self-evaluating way, right? Where I've done everything I can to be so self-aware, to like be mindful of like the behavior chains inside and out, to understand and address those patterns and those behavioral patterns, so that when the emotional body starts to become reactive and responsive, right, the logical brain can come into play and begin to navigate the balance in terms of how to show up in regards to social interactions. So, like, basically, how to be nice, right? How to be loving, how to be accepting, how to be a doormat. That's the part that I've had to overcome over the years, especially. It's learning how to not completely undermine myself by allowing other people to take over those roles. And so getting to this place of self-acceptance, or of wanting to stand in my own power, right? To shine and be the biggest light in the face of jealousy, in the face of all this other stuff. That's a big one. That's a big one. And I hope other people can find ways to step into their own power, into their own light, and to, I don't know, like, take their power back. The shift will happen though, because when you begin to change your perspective, right, and when you begin to drop those possessive dialogues and those behaviors and those patterns, you'll notice the world around you will start to shift, right? People will start interacting with you in different ways. And I think, especially for myself, the trickiest thing is being aware enough and mindful enough of those values and those boundaries, that where there's a no tolerance level, right? Where if you don't fit the grade, or if you don't whatever, like, you're not going to permeate through the cell wall, right? You're not going to get through the wall unless you fit in the right way, or unless you like match the energetic frequency. Like attracts like, and if you're a jealous person, you're going to attract more of that energy. Or if you're surrounded by people who are jealous, put yourself in a new environment. Put yourself in an environment where the frequencies are higher, where you have something to ascend yourself to, or elevate yourself to. Always grow, always learn. But yeah, it's tricky, we do what we can. I think maybe my last little bit here, let me see if I can, like, through all of this too, if I can remember another analogy, because I've been thinking a lot of, like, when it comes to the emotional body, right, of like cups. And we have this idea, especially in relationships, of like, I need to find my other half. If you're half full or half empty, but if you're only half of a thing, right, then you're still placing the expectation or the demand on another person to fulfill that other half of yourself. But if you show up as a full cup, right, like, then there's more, then you're not putting that expectation on other people to have to give you something, or to have to fulfill you in some sort of way, or you're not feeling empty, like you need to put something else in. And I'm trying to think of how this saying was put to me. I was told it's a Japanese saying along the lines of like, you should never necessarily keep your cup full, but like to pour off a little bit of the top, or like if your teacup's full, you can't put more tea in it, right? So you can't learn. If your teacup is already full, then you can't learn. So it's important every once in a while to take a sip off the top, right? And to leave room for growth, to leave room for more understanding, that sort of a thing. But to have to put the expectation on somebody else that they have to fulfill or give something to you, and it's only gonna perpetuate the competition and the jealousy, right? It creates this perception of lack, or there's not enough of, or like we can't share, or whatever. People get goofy. They get super goofy and all of that. All right. Well, so it's our last 2 minutes here before I jump off the radio. I'm Kelsey Sweet. You can find me on kelseysweet.com. Through there, you can find various projects that I've got. If you feel like sponsoring me, if you feel like donating to me, if you feel like getting an intuitive reading or something, or connecting with me in terms of coaching in any sort of way, let me know. Please reach out. I'm very open to taking on new stuff at the moment, and I'm playing around with ideas when it comes to like coaching, training, the transformative aspect. So I don't know, if you want to jump in there, great. Support Revolution Radio. Donate. We're based off your love here. We do this out of love for radio, love for information, love for truth. To go to Revolution Radio, donate to us if you can. We've got a Patreon page you can contribute to. That way, if you would like, you can send in checks if you like. I don't know, you can, go to the website, figure it out. I'm tired. I'm gonna go home. No, just kidding, I'm already home. I never leave home anymore, it seems. Just kidding, home is where the heart is. My heart's with love, my heart's with you, my heart's with the collective, my heart's with creativity. My motive, my motion here is co-creating conscious, creative communities, doing so however I can. And in this transient phase that I'm in this transition, I'm looking forward to going into my second year of radio and getting a new intro up. It's in the works. My friend contacted me today and said hopefully next week he'll get on it, and it's all in divine timing, right? It's all gonna happen when it's meant to happen, and I'm allowing and giving myself the permission to not have to be perfect, right? To just show up authentically, to show up as I am, and to hold truth and to be strong in my own truth, right? And so hopefully within that, we can figure out how to work together. Check your jealousy, check your competition, check your female energy, give somebody a hug. Love to see you guys next week. Revolution Radio, Wednesdays.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio.